Good evening, everybody. Thanks everyone for tuning in. It's a lovely night in Chocorua, and hopefully it's a lovely night wherever you are tuning in here, so appreciate it. I'm just going to briefly talk about the stewardship program and my roles in that over the course of the last year. Alex, you can set up the next slide. So I'm not going to read word for word, but as many of you know, most of my primary responsibility is working to ensure that the covenants and the conservation easements that we hold are honored. That's done through our annual stewardship review in cooperation with landowners, communicating with landowners, documenting any changes on the land, and no changes as well. Alex mentioned in violation during the past year that took a lot of our efforts. I also spent time providing resources and answering questions for landowners, sometimes related to the covenants on their property or easements on their property, and sometimes just extra resources for the way they want to manage their land. So that's one of my favorite parts of the job. I'd like to thank those landowners who help out by returning their reply forms and making this unusual COVID year a little bit easier to deal with by either welcoming a phone call or a visit with mask and a distance. Appreciate that. Another role I have is working through this capacity with the Land Conservation Committee. And as Alex said, we have a couple new easements, potential easements that we're working on, so we're excited about those. And I work with the Lake and Property Management Committee, and Sheldon's going to talk a little bit more about that, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But some of these pictures reflect some of the work that happens during the year. And then, of course, working with Juno and some of the remote educational programs that we've been offering this year has also been not quite the same as being able to do a nice walk in the woods to Heron Pond or some other property, but it's nice to be able to get the word out and see people at least on Zoom for those programs. Next slide, Alex.
Sure.
Yep, so in May, we were really lucky to have a really dedicated volunteer for 3 weeks. Rory Hallowell joined us as part of a senior project through school. And he helped clear out the berms and swales down by the lake, which is an annual task that's a bit backbreaking. He helped us mulch and do some water quality testing, get signs up, weed and mulch shrubs on various properties, trail work, and mapping, and helping to collect some information for natural resources inventories. So that was really helpful. And I want to thank Rory for his hard work and his perseverance, especially as he had to adjust his school project to what was happening with schools and COVID. So that was very helpful. We are always looking for volunteers, maybe not for a long term like that as Rory did, but are so appreciative of those volunteers who help with mailings or spreading mulch or stewarding properties. So right now we're looking for a few folks who might be interested in being property stewards. So that is pretty much a self-guided volunteer opportunity if you like to be out in the woods exploring and wandering trails or wandering properties without trails, maybe following boundaries, being the eyes and ears on the ground, so to speak, as we continue to work on protecting the properties that we own. An example of that is the CLC Burt Lot, which is about a 17-acre parcel in Albany, north of the lake, which is a beautiful kind of shoreline property along the Chocorua River that really is a pretty spot, bounded by the White Mountain National Forest on the other side of the river. But we're looking for a property steward who might want to take a walk a couple times a year and just be the eyes and ears on the ground and file a report for us once a year to help us keep track of what's there. Alex, next slide. One of the things about becoming a steward or a monitor is it provides wonderful opportunities to be in nature, to be outside and making discoveries as you go. On the Charlotte C. Brown Memorial Woods, there's a patch of wood lilies that are growing in the field. And They've probably been there for a long time, but we didn't really notice them until this year. They kind of blended in with a patch of daylilies that are growing there at the edge of the field. They're these kind of indescript, low orange looking flowers, but they're so beautiful with the bright orange petals and spots that are quite beautiful. And when you become a steward, it's a wonderful opportunity to make those discoveries and help provide that information to us that we can put into our property management plans. And if you're interested in joining as a steward or becoming part of the steward crew, we would love to have you give us a call or send an email. We can provide you with the training and give you some ideas of some cool navigation apps that you can use on your phone if you want, or just a map and compass if you'd like. And also some really cool flower ID apps that I've just learned about, which I'd be happy to share with you. So at that, I'll just turn it back on for the next step. And thank you so much for all of you who help volunteer and who are part of this organization. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Lynn, very much. If you have questions for Lynn, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll try to keep track of them, and if we have time, we'll turn it back to Lynn to answer for the group as a whole, or we'll answer in the breakout rooms. Sheldon Perry, thank you. Sheldon is the Vice President of the board, and he's chair of the Lake and Property Management Committee that manages all the public access area, which has been a pretty busy summer for usage of. Sheldon.
Well, thank you. So I'm very appreciative of the help I get from our wonderful committee. I'm actually what I would say co-chair with Dave Farley, who's been leading the charge for quite a while. We have Andy Fisher, Bob Seston, Dwight Baldwin, and John Watkins on our committee as well. I'm going to start out with the big project that we've got going at the top of the hill, coming down from Chocorua to the lake region. It's the Basin View Lot, and that's really a multi-year project for us. It's gone through a lot of steps, including working with the Bowditch family, doing the design drawings for it. We've been working on various elements of the view lot, which includes a sign for everyone to understand how it happened and what the few rules that might be there. There's a gate that'll be fabricated that opens up the barn access for the family. The big thing going on right now is the stone walls that Gary Jones is working on. And I have to say, he's doing just a beautiful, beautiful job. It's a really big job. I think it's bigger than he anticipated. It's a drywall. It's a very high drywall. It's a very thick drywall, and it's going to be around for a long time. And so if you get a chance to see that, it's really quite an amazing piece of art. After that, the final grading will be done by John Roberts. We hope that'll be done fairly shortly. Maybe the Labor Day-ish or soon after time period, in which case we can sort of put all the pieces of the puzzle together, a few stone benches. And so there'll be 3 parking spaces and a beautiful viewing area to see the lake and the mountain. Beyond that, we maintain the public access areas. We spread wood chips. We recently improved all the signage with very nice CLC blue and white lettering signs that you'll notice. I think it's a lot more attractive, and I think it educates the people about the rules and quite nicely. Obviously, as Alex mentioned, Troy Emerson does a really big job every day, 7 days a week during the warm season to patrol the premise, pick up the rubbish, which unfortunately there's more than there should be. So it's always very clean, and make sure that the rules are being followed. The big thing we've been doing over this last few weeks, people have noticed a lot of congestion in terms of the number of cars and where they park. There's been a lot of use around the lakes and rivers of the whole valley. And so there's a symptom of the fact that a lot of these public places are under a lot of pressure to, by the public. We have a mission statement to welcome the public, and I think it's a really important aspect of what we do. But, with the complaints, we as a committee have been working hard to try to manage that better and to educate the public more and to increase the flow and the efficiency of the traffic through that, in particular the island area, make it safer for everybody. And so we're working with the Board of Selectmen in Tamworth, we're working with the Highway Department, and we're working with the Police Department. So we have more leverage for enforcement, and the people will be better educated as to exactly how to park and to manage their time there. Beyond that, we do some fun things like remove invasive plants on our stewardship days. We plant shrubbery and, for increased wildlife habitat. We also pay attention to the water itself, and thanks to Dwight Baldwin, who leads that charge and has for many years, with testing and lab reports, which over the many years have had a very good water quality in the lake. And even despite the heavy use, we can be assured that the water has been very good. We monitor the water level at the lake with at the dam, and there's always this and that, but I think that's really the essentials of what we do. If there's any questions, I think again maybe use that chat function. So appreciate all the work that that the committee helps me with. It's a real team effort.
Thank you, Sheldon, and thanks for all your coordination with the town in terms of how we can better manage the public access areas and deal with the parking and overcrowding issues we've had. So I think next is back to you again, Sheldon. We have 2 nominations to the board.
So tell you what, if it's okay, I'd like to just read the slate of nominations from very quickly, the people who have been there the longest to the people that are going to be our new people. Okay. Nominations for a 3rd term, this is 3-year terms, is Steve Leno, Alex Moot, Bob Seston, and Penny Wheeler Abbott. Nominations for their 2nd term, again 3 years, is Andy Fisher and Bill Mayer. And we're really excited about 2 new nominations to the board on their 1st term. That would be Rick Almendinger and Michael Reisch. So maybe I'll just say a few words about each of them, although I have to say, these are both very accomplished, well-educated professionals and in their fields. And you've got the bios in front of you, so I don't want to linger too much there. But I might just mention a couple of their local connections. Rick, as we know him quite well for those people who went to our annual meeting a few years ago when he presented quite an amazing geology tour with LiDAR imagery, which really depicted the geology just at the mountain and south of the mountain and the lake region, with all the eskers and the deltas and the cane terraces and things like that that were just amazing to see from a LiDAR image. And it really shows that he has a strong interest in this area to do something like that. We were all so impressed. Also, the other thing that he's provided to us and the public is the map app, which I've used actually quite a bit. I like wandering around in the Heron Pond area, and I do winter hiking there and whatnot, and it tracks where you are. It depicts points of interest and whatnot, and it's very user friendly. The information's private, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful app. Michael, he's been connected to the area through the Meadowbrook Farm, where next to the Chocorua River. And apparently, and we all know quite well that they have a organic blueberry pick your own farm going there. And that's been, quite a beautiful resource for us. Michael is a professor of pediatrics. Now we can make sure I've got this right, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. He's currently working at Boston Children's Hospital and very involved with the work on the health and development of children. Currently, he's got a house on Page Hill, and certainly we enjoy having him around. And I know both these folks take good advantage of the natural resources here in our area and do the hiking and skiing and whatever snowshoeing that we all like to participate in. So are you going to make the nominations, or do you want me to make the nominations for the board?
I think the nominating committee has recommended a slate on this current page to the board, and I think we need a motion or two to put it to a vote.
So moved.
I second.
Great, let me pull up. Okay, the poll has, if you're in favor, please indicate your vote. People are getting so fast at this. There. All right. Thank you for your voting. We have a unanimous vote. I wanted to promise Michael and Rick that we'd never had a proposed member voted down, so we keep our streak alive. Okay. So with that, this is the, thank you very much, Sheldon. Sheldon really did a lot of legwork, in particular, reaching out to people from the community, summer folk, year-round folk, We have a lot of people who are very interested in serving on the board and serving committees, and some of them say, well, just not yet, not this year. So we hope we'll have some new names next year as well. So with that, we have, we've restaggered the boards a little bit because, as Melissa mentioned, we had 6 members with terms expiring this August, and then 3 next year and none the year after. So we restaggered the board a little bit. I should note that there are 4 of us, including myself, and Bob Seston, who's the treasurer, and Penny, who's the secretary, and Steve Lanou, who we all, at the end of the next 3-year term, must step off the board. That's under our bylaws. You can't serve more than 3 consecutive terms. So over the next couple of years, we are going to be trying to bring in new blood. We've had a lot of the same board members since we merged and formed the CLC in 2014, and we really want to get more younger people with fresh ideas, and many more year-round residents involved, because it's your lake and your lake basin. With that, I'm going to turn over to Ken Smith. Ken, I think I saw you with us. If you make sure you're unmuted, and love to hear about the Chocorua Mountain Club.
Hello, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.
So nice to see everybody. I will be brief. Couple quick announcements. First off, the work that's going to be done by the White Mountain Trail Collective and outside volunteers and the Forest Service, etc., will commence in 2021, COVID-19 permitting. They are working now up in the Mount Washington Valley, so we know the crews can go out. All of our trails have been approved with 2 exceptions, and we're working on those exceptions. And it's a small piece of 2 trails, but all of our trails have been approved for pretty significant work. There is some work that needs to get done on all of our trails for this year. So if you had previously volunteered to go up on May, Trail Clearing Day, if you can still make it up, that would be great. What we ask more than anything else is please take pictures. If you can use a GPS app, I think you can use Dix, I think you can use Gaia GPS, anything to help us pinpoint exactly where you see significant work that needs to get done. We don't need pictures of every single water bar, but if there's obviously rocks that have been moved, a water bar that's completely overwhelmed, serious runoff, 5 or 6 trees right in a row, something pretty major, the more information that we can share with the Forest Service and the WMTC, the better they can plan the cruise. You can email that to chocoruamountainclub@gmail.com. And I do monitor that email. So again, just hope folks can do a little bit more surveying. Anne Marie and I will be doing a big survey on the 3rd of September with the Forest Service and the WMTC. If anybody is around on Friday, September 18th, the Tamworth Distillery is going to be having an event in their backyard, and they've invited us to put out a table. I'll be bringing my chainsaw and a couple of other items to show folks this is what we do. We're going to be selling t-shirts, etc. It's mainly a social and a musical event, I gather. So if you would like to show up and support us, that would be great. And do please mark your calendars for Saturday, May 8, 2021. We will likely be mustering down by the bridge, down in the Grove, because we've got a good number of folks coming in from the outside, Forest Service folks, Trail Collective folks from the Chocorua community as well. So please put that on your calendar. Work begins that year, so the most important thing is that we clear away all of the blowdowns so that the crews going up to the heavy work do not have to worry about those blowdowns. So we're hoping for a really great turnout in 2021, and stay tuned. We will be making more announcements in the coming weeks. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, we had one question from Ruth about that last year. I think you mentioned that there was an app being worked on to track where trail work was needed to be done.
There are a couple of options. The Forest Service has a professional version that we have been desperately trying to get access to. They haven't set it up yet, so it's not live, but that would actually allow people to survey specific locations and have that data go directly to the Forest Service so that there's no data interchange requirement. There is another app that's called Gaia GPS. That's spelled G-I-A GPS. It's free. If you can download the app, you start it when you start walking. It will find you all the way along the trail. When you get to a piece of work that needs to get done, you open up the app again, take a picture, and it will automatically locate that image right at the location that you're taking it. That is a huge help. Again, you know, when we think about doing the work, how far up do we need to carry heavy tools? Is it 1 mile, or is it 2 miles, or is it really 3 or 4 miles? So the more detail we can get, the better.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. With that, we are through the business of the meeting. Thank you for staying with us with the slide deck. Now we're going to get to something much more interesting, we hope. I want to thank both Bob and Tara for joining us today. Tara is a local Chocorua resident and frequent user of the lake, so she knows us well. And Bob, I think, has a summer place, vacation house a little south of us. So with that, I will turn over to Bob and Tara and let them make you guys co-host so you can present your own slides. 1 second here. So making GMC, who has the slides? Tara, you have the slides?
No,
Bob does.
Bob does. Okay, 1 second here. Bob, did I ever make you a co-host? I forget.
you did not.
Okay, I gotta find you. 1 second here. I apologize. I'm scrolling through looking for Bob. There should be a faster way of doing this. I'm sure there is. I'm gonna stop the screen share. Now help me find Bob. Where is Bob? There you are. Okay, you are now a co-host. You should be able to share your screen.
All righty.
Why don't you give that a shot?
Yep, all set.
Great. Okay.
Great.
And let me just. All right.
All right, this is Tara, and can everyone hear me okay? Coming through loud and clear? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Tara.
Yes, okay, excellent. Just checking, because I have a little internet issue that I'm dealing with. All right, so thank you, first of all, to the CLC folks for inviting Bob and I to speak tonight at your annual meeting. And also to the Tamworth Foundation for supporting drinking water education programs this year and next in Tamworth. Most of all,
Tara, we've just lost you.
Oh, you might want to need to take over.
All right, so I can do it. Let's, I'm not going to get all the things that she wanted to say. Tara, are you there? All right, so I'll go ahead and take over until she shows up, if she can show up back again. Tara wanted to thank everybody, including the Tamworth Foundation, for helping to fund the work that she's doing, and of course her parent organization, the Green Mountain Conservation Group, for doing this. And her position is education coordinator at the Green Mountain Conservation Group. I will try to. So the organization is, its goal, it's committed to the conservation of shared natural resources in the Ossipee watershed through research, education, advocacy, and land conservation. The primary towns that are in the watershed are Eaton, Effingham, Freedom, Ossipee, Madison, Sandwich, and Tamworth. And of course, the GMCG also partners with the Saco River Corridor Commission in Maine. And one of the things that Tara wanted to be very clear about is how important water is to everyone, that is more important than oil. And she has this quote from NASA that about water is the commodity of the century. There are probes to Mars and Moon, and they're not looking for oil, they're looking for water. And so that's kind of what Green Mountain is all about, is looking at a watershed perspective of water in the area, both the groundwater and the surface water. And so as you can see from the map, the Ossipee watershed is quite large, you know, extending from the Sandwich Range all the way down through Pine River and eastward to the Maine border. One of the programs that Tara runs is the REAL program. You know, it's the way that she looks at things, and it involves a research component, an education component, advocacy, and land conservation. And they try to, you know, as she is an education coordinator, and she works hard to work with kids in the watershed and schools in the watershed to get students directly involved in all aspects of the watershed. We can skip this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, and hopefully she gets back here by the end, because she has another section at the end. You know, I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done cooperatively over the past 20 years or so. And we're going to be looking at drinking water tonight. And in the watershed, you know, which involves, there are about 14 towns, and about 70% of the people in the watershed rely on private wells for their water supply. And the rest, the 30%, rely on public water systems, but even those public water systems, for the most part, are drawing from groundwater. So groundwater is an essential component to the watershed. And even the public water supplies, you know, they have a way of looking at their systems, and there's regulations, and they have to, on a regular basis, do water quality analysis. But the private wells are, for the most part, unregulated, and there's no program to regularly monitor water quality in the groundwater. So, you know, starting in 2009, GMCG has cooperated with Smith, and we've done 3 water quality studies, which were pretty wide-ranging in terms of the things that were analyzed. And it varied from study to study a little bit, but all of the studies involved looking at the major components, major cations and anions that make up the water, as well as looking at trace components like metals. And also in the 2016 program of 70 wells, we also looked at a wide range of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. So we have looked at over 200 wells, water samples. And some of the things we find, that's a lot, we really have a lot of different findings. We don't have time really to talk about too many of them, but I'm going to talk about what I think are some of the more important ones. And some are, like the fluoride, are kind of interesting because we find that there's relatively high fluoride concentrations in many of the wells. In many of the wells, the fluoride is high enough so that it's above the 1.2 milligram per liter concentration that that's recommended for fluoride for children. So that in those wells, people shouldn't be giving their kids fluoride treatments because there's enough in the water already. And in some cases, there's even higher amounts where there's too much fluoride, it becomes a problem and can lead to some bone issues. And so a few of the wells were even above that level. So there's a fluoride issue, and chloride as well, which we'll talk about. And heavy metals, in the last study, we did a more wide-ranging heavy metal study looking at uranium. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other thing we did in 2019 was we looked at the threat to the groundwater that was coming from Pine Tree Power as they proposed a change in their operations to discharge wastewater directly into the aquifer. So those are the things I think we're going to try to talk about. So I want to start, because I'm a geologist, I want to talk a little bit about the aquifers first and how they got to be where they are. And there are 3 different aquifers that people use in this area, in this watershed. I think the most important is the stratified drift aquifer, and we'll define what that means in a moment. But on this map, you can see that it's the areas shaded in yellow. And these are deposits from meltwater streams that produce sorted, stratified sediments that tend to have very high groundwater yield. The rest of the area is covered by glacial till. And glacial till is an unsorted, unstratified material that is has some water in it. It could be very thin, and if it's very thin, there's not usable water in it, but it could be in other places it's quite thick and there is usable water. And so many people in the areas of till will, especially the older houses, will have dug wells that are able to extract enough water out of the till. And then we have bedrock wells that are drilled, and they exist throughout the watershed in all different kinds of situations. And there's some water quality issues associated with each of those aquifers. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll start with the stratified drift aquifer. And here we are out on the plains in Madison, Tamworth, Ossipee, Freedom area, where the Pine Barrens is located. And this is a giant glacial outwash plain. And you can see it on the LiDAR. I mentioned the LiDAR. LiDAR has changed the way geologists look at landscapes. It's just a revolutionary technology, is to take this data, which is elevations of the land surface, say roughly 1 meter intervals, and you can create these digital elevation models, as we see here, and the color is elevation. And so it ranges from the areas in blue here are the lowest elevations, and the areas in dark brown are the highest elevations. And then you shade them, and you end up with a view of the landscape. And here we see the big area of the plains or the Pine Barrens, and you have Silver Lake here to the east and Moore's Pond to the west. And I think you can all see the meltwater stream channels that still exist across this landscape. It's hard to believe, but there they are, just as if the glacier just left. And even better, here on the east side of Silver Lake, we see beautiful meltwater channels here, an incredible esker system here. And these areas are all stratified sand and gravels. They're deposits made by meltwater streams. The eskers will have the coarser sediment and probably the potential to hold a lot of water. But the outwash also could have a lot. And then you come to the brown areas down here, and this is glacial till. And you can even maybe see, if you look carefully here, there's kind of a lineation to the landscape, and that's the direction of ice flow across the area, with some till being deposited on either side of this bedrock knob right here. And so we have the different aquifers that here would be the till aquifer here, and the sand and gravel aquifer here. And we can see them in the landscape, and we can see how they formed. And a lot of the characteristics of the aquifers are the result of knowing how they form. So here is a typical exposure of the stratified drift with layers of gravels and sands. And you can just imagine that makes a really nice aquifer. The glacial till, on the other hand, tends to be a mixture of boulders, sand, silt, and clay, all mixed together. It can hold groundwater, but it has enough fine-grained material so it doesn't transmit it as well as the sand and gravel does. And then the final one, the final aquifer, is that bedrock aquifer. Now I have to admit that this is a photo from the Sierra Nevada in California, but it's granite landscape. It's been glaciated. These glaciers didn't leave behind any till or stratified drift, so we see the landscape directly. And I think you can see, based on the vegetation in part, is the fractures that run through this system. And really the only opportunity for water in this area is in the fractures. So we have fracture porosity, and we have the intergranular porosity. So here's the intergranular porosity on the left, and this is what we have in the stratified drift aquifers, and we've got a water table and saturated zone down below, and this is pretty well sorted material, so it's got a high porosity and a high ability to transmit water. The fractures, they're really exaggerated here. There's much less water in general within the fractures than compared to in the stratified drift. The stratified drift will have enough movement of water through fine pores that it cleans out bacteria very quickly, whereas that's not true in fractures. Fractures, the water will move more rapidly, and it doesn't get cleaned like it does as it goes through sand. And here we can see this is water coming out of a fracture right after a rainstorm next to the road. You can see the water's really flowing out of there. It doesn't really filter the water the way the sand and gravel. So we have three kinds of wells, and each one have different water quality issues. We have the drilled wells that are going into the bedrock, or they could be going into the stratified drift. We have driven points that if you're fortunate enough to be in the stratified drift, you can put your own well in by driving in a point. So that's only in the stratified drift. And then the dug wells go in either to the glacial till or to the stratified drift. So the dug wells are going to have a high volume of water within them if they penetrate to the water table. So they have a fair amount of storage. So even though the flow may be slow going through the ground, there's a big reservoir there to pump from. So that's an advantage. A disadvantage is that they're fairly easily contaminated from surface water and so have bacteria issues. Driven points are small, shallow, and if you draw your water from the shallow part of the aquifer, it's going to have a different chemistry than if you draw your water from the deep part of the aquifer. So there are definitely differences in the quality of the water in different situations. This is a map by Moore and Medali in 1995 from the USGS, which sort of defines the stratified drift aquifer and a lot of the characteristics of this aquifer. And you can see the blue area. This is where where the outwash plains, pine barrens is located here. So lots of groundwater here, and we'll see what that happens to that later on. When you're in that stratified drift aquifer, you're going to put in a well, you sort of have to decide, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go into the stratified drift, or am I going to go through the stratified drift into bedrock? Many people, today, there are a lot of people going through the stratified drift, and they case off the stratified drift aquifer from their well, and they actually are avoiding some of the greatest water in the system and taking water out of the bedrock. It's kind of an issue associated with the well drillers more than anything. But that we have this nice saturated, unsaturated zone. The water flows through the system. We have in the plains, you can just imagine, wherever you go and pour water on the ground, it's going to infiltrate into the ground. So high amounts of recharge, but very susceptible to contamination. Eventually all the water runs into the streams. So the flow systems are that the groundwater systems support the rivers during dry periods. So if you go out to the Chocorua River downstream from the lake, you'll see that there's water still flowing in the river, even though it hasn't rained very much lately. And all that water is coming from the groundwater reservoir. Okay, so let's talk about the contaminants. And so I'm going to talk today about three kinds of contaminant groups. We'll have the natural contaminants, and the natural contaminants, and this is going to be from the latest 2019 survey, where we looked at a wider range of potential contaminants. And you know, the ones we might be interested in this area would be arsenic, and of the 85 wells that we sampled, none had arsenic above the maximum contaminant level standard that we use to gauge whether a well is contaminated or not. For uranium, this was kind of a surprise, although it shouldn't have been, that 7 of those 85 wells were contaminated with uranium higher than the MCL, and only 1 with cadmium. Why arsenic? Why are we interested in arsenic? Well, the rocks in New Hampshire, some of the rocks in New Hampshire produce a lot of arsenic. And this is a study from AOD in 2012 in which they looked at the probability of arsenic occurring in well water. And you can see in the southeastern part of the state, there's high probability of arsenic contamination, but when you get up to our area, it's much lower. So we don't usually see a lot of arsenic in our wells, even though it is an issue in New Hampshire. Uranium, however, is now recognized to being an issue. This is from New Hampshire's Health and Human Services website, trying to alert you, is there uranium in your drinking water, and you should be looking for it and considering what the impact is. And we found in our study 7 wells of the 85 were contaminated with uranium above the maximum contaminant level of 30 parts per billion. And interestingly enough, they all occur in the area of the stratified drift aquifer, even though I'm not sure that all the wells are tapping the stratified drift aquifer, as I know a few of them are, I know some are drilled wells that are casing off the stratified drift aquifer and into the bedrock. And this is something we need to look further into to see what situation, what hydrologic situation are you most likely to get uranium coming into your water. But it's coming from the rocks, and it's a natural contaminant. The lead and copper that we see in our water supplies are not natural, but they're not coming from somebody dumping lead or copper somewhere on the surface of the earth. It's from your own plumbing system. And so in the lead and copper analyses that we did as part of the 2019 sample, we found 16 of the wells were contaminated with copper, and that's where you might see the blue staining in your sinks and things like that from the copper sulfate, and only 2 were lead contaminated. Now, this lead and copper is coming from your pipes if you have copper pipes, and if your house is older and you have lead solder used to put the plumbing system together, that lead-based solder, then it's going to be more likely. But even if you don't, if you have galvanized fixtures or galvanized pipe, that can also be a source of lead. And all the waters, over 90% of the waters that we analyzed were highly corrosive. They would classify as being either from severely corrosive to moderately corrosive. There was very few wells that were in a condition where scale might form within your pipe. So we have a system, a groundwater system that's producing fairly corrosive water, so it's going to attack your plumbing if it can. So how big a problem is it really to have the copper contamination and lead contamination? So we followed the lead copper rule, EPA's lead copper rule for sampling. And so we would take a sample from the faucet early in the morning before any water had been used in the house. And we have the faucet turned on full blast to collect the sample. And then we let the water run for 5 minutes or so and then take a second sample. And that's what we're seeing here. So here on the copper side, we see the red bars are copper. The blue bars are copper after 5 minutes. So you see the first flush had very high concentrations of copper, but in all cases, after 5 minutes, the copper concentration had dropped below the maximum contaminant, true for both copper and for lead. So the take-home message here is that if you're, drawing water for a glass of water, run the water for a little bit. Or if you're drawing water for cooking, run the water for a little bit, and it will help keep your concentrations of lead and copper down below that MCL. And last, I want to talk a little bit about salt contamination. And this may be the biggest long-term problem that we face. And the salts are coming in part from de-icing salts, road salt. Landfill from, leachate from landfills has also got high chloride. And also septic tank leachate can have high chloride, especially if there's a water softener in the home. Water softeners work by exchanging sodium for calcium. So the calcium and magnesium in the water, and even the iron to some extent, gets exchanged for sodium. And to replenish the system, a brine of sodium chloride is run through the cartridge that holds the exchange resin. And that water is then flushed down the drain into the septic system. So that's putting a brine into the septic system, which is then going out the leach field into the groundwater system. So septic tanks, if you have a water softener, could be a really big source of salt contamination. In addition, industrial wastewater is another one, and then some fertilizers. So there are multiple sources of salt contamination. And so what did we find in the last two studies? I put those two together. And there were only what we'll consider 2 wells that were completely salt contaminated. And to define salt contamination, in this case, we're going to say a concentration of chloride over 250 milligrams per liter. And although there's no MCL for chloride, it's not a regulated substance. When the concentrations get that high, you can taste the salt. And we all know you can't live on salt water. If the water gets too salty, it's not healthy for you. But there were only 2 that had concentrations above those values. But interestingly enough, this one over here was not close to a significant road. Route 16, we might expect them along Route 16 would be an area where we might expect a lot of chloride contamination, but that wasn't true. This well was located in a development out on the plains, pretty far away from even Route 41. So it's hard to imagine how road salt could have contaminated that well. And then the other well over here is actually not on 25, it's on this side road here. So it may be that road salt could be a significant source in some places, but it doesn't explain all of them. And so if we then look and say, well, okay, instead of using the 250 milligram per liter, let's use something more general, say 100 milligrams per liter. How many wells had concentrations above 100 milligrams per liter? And the answer was 12. Again, some of them were on Route 16, but many of them weren't. Many of them were out in the stratified drift. So it's hard to know where the salt's coming from those things. Now, what would we expect the concentration of chloride to be if there were no people living in the area? So if we look at this bar graph here, and it is the number of wells versus the chloride concentration. So the lowest ones here, 0 to 5 milligrams per liter. In 2016, there were like 45 wells in that study that had concentrations of chloride in the 0 to 5 range. And I would argue that that's probably what the pristine system would be. There were fewer than that in the 2019 survey, even though there were more wells in the 2019 survey. So that's kind of interesting. And as you go through the higher concentrations and compare 2016 to 2019, you can see that the 2019 surveys often had there were more wells with those higher concentrations in 2019 than 2016. And in fact, in 2019, the highest concentration well was 590 milligrams per liter. And that was, by the way, out here in the plains. And in 2016, the highest was 171. So there's a hint here that concentrations may be increasing through time. And the state has noted this. This again is Laura Medali who who worked on that first aquifer study, and she compared the median chloride concentrations in towns in 1995 versus 2005. And I think you look at these two maps, you can see that there are more higher concentrations in 2005 than in 1995. And if you look at our data, because in 2016 and 2019, there were about 6 wells that we sampled that in both years. So the same well sampled in both years. They were sampled both at in the same month of the year. They were sampled in June. And we can see that there is there appears to be a significant linear trend such that the concentrations in 2019 were higher than they were in 2016. So let's look at here. In 2016, if you had a well at 100 milligrams per liter, in 2019, it would be 150 milligrams per liter. That's a 50% increase in chloride concentration in 3 years. So everything seems to be pointing towards increased chloride concentrations. Okay, so let's look at the last thing here. What about the Pine Tree Power issue? So in 2019, this last survey we did, we looked at Pine Tree Power and what the effect of their proposed change in wastewater disposal would be. So what Pine Tree Power wanted to do was they have wastewater that comes out of their cooling system, and the wastewater had been trucked to a wastewater facility over in Ashland, I think, in New Hampshire, and they wanted to instead take that wastewater and dispose of it on their property. And their property is right in the middle of the plains. So they proposed to dispose of 100,000 gallons of wastewater per day through these rapid infiltration basins. And here we see one of their rapid infiltration basins that they built. And oh, it's not a big surprise. Look, they dug down just a few feet and they hit this wonderful sand, and you could pour as much water in there as you wanted and it would just disappear very quickly. So yeah, rapid infiltration basins work great. So their proposal was to dispose of 100,000 gallons of wastewater per day for they wanted a 5-year permit to do it. In January of 2019, they were granted a temporary permit to sort of test whether they could infiltrate that much water or not. Now, here's a map. The pipe here shows where those infiltration basins are. This over here is Route 41. Here's Pine Tree Power right here. So it's over the old abandoned railroad tracks in this area right here. And they're proposing to do this disposal right here. And then the yellow dots represent houses in the area. The blue dot represents the Tamworth Pines well. It's a public water supply that supplies a lot of the houses here with water. And in fact, the wellhead protection area for the Tamworth Pines well is within 50 feet of the rapid infiltration basins. So this is potentially a big problem. And I might mention here that this well right here was the one with the highest chloride concentration in the 2019 study. So they proposed to do this, and they did do it. They put in 500,000 gallons of wastewater into the ground. And this is the water that they were infiltrating. They were infiltrating, so one thing, the wastewater does change quite a bit in concentrations from time to time, but this is one of their concentrations that they reported. And, you know, it had a sodium concentration of 8,900 milligrams per liter, chloride at 9,200 milligrams per liter, sulfate at 6,000. This is, you know, this is almost seawater. And if you look at from our previous well surveys in the area of the Pine Barrens. We had 7 wells that we have analyzed there, and we took the average values in those 7 wells from a previous study, and we found that the sodium was only 5.5, the chloride was 3.8, and they're going to inject 9,200 milligrams per liter, and they're going to do 100,000 a day. That was their plan. Now, it turned out that the Ossipee Aquifer Protection Advisory Board that Green Mountain had helped to create, we wrote a letter to the state pointing out the issues associated with doing this and what the impact would be on wells in the area. And
Bob, I just want to jump in. I'm back. And
oh, good, Tara.
yes, I've been watching. Great job. I just wanted to let you know we've got to wrap this up, but I think you're almost done anyway. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I'm back for my last few slides here.
Excellent, excellent. Worked perfectly. So what happened here was that the letter was written and sent to the state, various things, and then NG, the company that owned Tamworth Power, then withdrew their permit request, and that's where it ended. So they weren't denied the permit, but they withdrew their permit. So Tara, take it away.
All right. First of all, sorry for that little glitch. I got booted off the internet, but I'm back, and I just wanted to leave folks with a few other takeaway points and empower you to get on board with drinking water protection locally, because we have to start thinking on a watershed-wide scale and long-term if we're going to protect these critically, important sources of drinking water for future generations. So the OAAC is the Ossipee Aquifer Advisory Committee that Bob mentioned. Here are our mission and objectives. Our next meeting is in September from 5 to 6 p.m. We'll do this presentation again, but also we have a guest speaker, Sean Wadsworth from the Albany Conservation Commission, talking about their groundwater protection ordinance work this year, which may be really beneficial to towns like Tamworth that don't have one currently in place to prevent some of the riskiest land uses from happening directly over those critical aquifer lands. So Bob, can you do the next slide? And so just on this slide, there's a map here of all the towns in our watershed that do have aquifer protection ordinances or overlay districts, which are actually municipalities are encouraged to have some sort of additional protection above and beyond what the state offers to drinking water resources. So the ones in red are ones that do have something in place, and the ones in blue do not. So what can you do to protect drinking water? Well, you can be a part of this Aquifer Advisory Committee. It's open to the public, and basically it's the eyes and ears for our aquifer. We keep ourselves up to date with potential drinking water issues, looking through things like DES, the Department of Environmental Services One-Stop Data site, which is, again, open to the public. It's online access to public water supply, well quality results, and different potential contamination sources across the watershed. You can ensure the protection measures are in place in your town or work towards getting something in place. And you can also test your water. DES recommends every 3 to 5 years, and every year for places where bacteria or nitrates could be an issue. And you can help support drinking water education for your community. We do a lot of programs for the schools and also for the public. We'll see what that looks like in the coming year. But you can get out there and attend a training and help in the schools when that's something that's accessible, and attend these workshops online until then. Okay, next one. And I just want to leave you with these messages. The education and outreach really is one of our best defenses against contamination. So getting the word out tonight has been really important for us. And thank you again to CLC for inviting us to be your speakers. It's really critical that we spread this message of the connections between surface water and groundwater, and planning on a watershed-wide scale. And we all live downstream. Many people may not know that over 300,000 people get their drinking water from the Saco River. And of course, we are upstream from all those people. So we all live downstream. And on the bottom of the slide, there's a couple of additional resources that you can look to if you want to look into health impacts of some of the contaminants that Bob mentioned from the groundwater studies. You can look at the fact sheet link here. And always go to gmcg.org for more information as well. And thank you so much, Bob. He's our High Watch Award recipient in 2020 for more than 22 years of collaboration with Green Mountain Conservation Group and helping to protect the Ossipee Aquifer. Thank you so much, Bob, for joining us. And thank you, CLC. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight.